Hello, everyone. Welcome to IPWatchdog Unleashed, where each week we journey into the world of intellectual property to discuss the laws, news, policy, and politics of innovation, technology, and creativity. With analysis and commentary from industry thought leaders and newsmakers from around the world, IPWatchdog Unleashed is hosted by world-renowned patent attorney and the founder of IPWatchdog.com, Gene Quinn, who has twice been named one of the most influential people in the intellectual property community and recognized numerous times as one of the top IP strategists in the world. Take it away, Gene.
Thanks, Renee, and welcome everybody to this week's edition of IPWatchdog Unleashed. This week I'm speaking with Deborah Farone, and Deborah is a marketing expert. She's with Farone Advisors, which she is founder of. And before she founded Farone Advisors, she spent 14 years as the chief marketing officer for Cravath, Swain Moore, which is where I met her when David Kapos left the patent office and joined Cravath many years ago. And now Deborah is also a best-selling author. She's written a couple books on marketing for lawyers, and her recent book is on breaking ground, how successful women lawyers build thriving practices. So this is a topic that's near and dear to my heart. As we've started doing more in-person events with IP Watchdog, I've seen some really good marketing from law firms. I've seen some really good rainmaking, and I've seen some stuff that has not been as good, I guess is the kind way to say it. So we're going to have a robust conversation about what it is we can and should be doing as lawyers. Deborah, thank you for being here today.
My pleasure, Gene. It's great to see you.
And it's good to be back in touch with you. And I've kind of watched your career from afar since you left Cravath, and it seems like you're everywhere. You're practicing what you preach is, I think, probably the best way to say it.
I have no option. For so many years, I was giving lawyers advice on how to build their businesses, and I really did believe in what advice I was giving them. And then all of a sudden, starting my own practice, I realized I better follow all of those things I've told them to do. So it's been a whole new experience to apply those lessons.
And have they worked as well as you thought that they would work?
They have. I'm glad to know that I had been giving good advice. But I do think it's difficult. I think there's always this pressure between doing really great work and also thinking about business development. And I think for lawyers who have busy practices, it's a really tough conundrum to deal with. I've had that firsthand knowledge about how hard it is, and maybe I didn't empathize with them as much as I should have when I give that advice in the past.
There's a lot there I want to talk about, but before we go down that path, let me just ask a couple questions, maybe to get to know you a little bit better. So our audience can be introduced to you, I suppose is the way to say it. How did you get involved with marketing in the first place? And how did you then get involved in legal marketing? Because it's a pretty niche area.
I always knew that I would be involved in marketing in some way or another. Even as a kid, I would hold on to every single magazine I would read and save it because I thought the ads were so interesting. So I've always had an interest in how people market products, but I think I became interested in how people marketed people when I worked at a PR firm called Ketchum. And we worked with one particular law firm, I think it was Milbank, and they were the first ones really to hire a PR agency. And this was decades ago. And I thought, what a great business to market. How do you market a professional? And how do you market a professional who's handling all these different types of matters and has these different kinds of cases? And I was just struck by it. So when I had the chance, 2 jobs later, after Ketchum, I went to Towers Watson. And from Towers Watson, I was hired by Deborah. I was delighted. Legal marketing was still relatively new, but I thought, what a great opportunity to work with these incredibly smart people and help them as they cultivated clients and cultivated new business.
So there's, again, a lot there I want to get into, because one of the things that I do see an awful lot of law firms working with PR people, and I don't know that I think that that's always the wisest thing for them to do, because it seems to me that there's so much about this that you just can't offsource. I mean, you can offsource like some of it, but it feels to me that a lot of what goes on in our industry, and I'll talk about the intellectual property industry because that's what I know the best, is often just a bunch of lawyers wanting somebody else to do it for them. And in my experience, that doesn't really work. And I see you're laughing. So
I
yeah.
know, I know. Listen, and it's a good response to being overwhelmed to think, "What can I give to someone else to do?" But I think when you either hire a PR agency, hire a PR person, or in my case, it's really marketing. So marketing is the PR, but it's also the strategy and it's also business development. Whatever it is, whether you're using an external source or an internal one, you really have to know the strategy. You really have to discuss it. You really have to agree with whoever is going to be helping you. And strategy needs to come before tactics. So, very often, lawyers will have a knee jerk reaction to just say, we need press around this practice area. But a good marketing person or a good PR person is gonna really work with that lawyer to make sure that they understand who are the competitors in the market, what makes a lawyer unique, what's their unique selling proposition, that's what we would say in product marketing, and what's their position in the marketplace. What are they trying to do? What are they trying to say? So a lawyer who hires someone to do PR for them needs to know that they have to be involved in the beginning, involving strategy. And then, of course, in execution, they're going to be the ones doing the interviews and following up with people. And lawyers who take responsibility for that and stay in touch with people and send follow up notes and really research the person that they're going to be speaking with, those are the ones that end up doing really well.
Yeah, and I agree with that wholeheartedly. And I've seen some stuff. And when we were talking about this conversation that we might have last week, that was one of the things that popped into my mind that I've seen where firms have led themselves right up to the end, done practically everything correct as far as I can tell, and then fumble the end game because there's no follow-up or there's no ask. And I've had in-house attorneys come to me and say, like, I'm just shocked that I knew they never asked me for any work, or they never they and one of the other ones is that I hear all the time is they didn't seem to know anything about us when they were talking to us, so they did all the background work to get into the room, to have the opportunity to be likable, and then it's just like, hey, I can do work for you, and it's like, well, it's better asking than not asking, I suppose, but that doesn't strike me as a real good strategy either.
No, I think, and you point up two interesting things. The first is going into a meeting unprepared. And especially today, with the access we all have to information, and I won't even say on AI, because I think even just going on the internet and looking at the news of a company, their recent earnings, who is on their board, there's so much that firms can find out, whether they have access to databases like Equilar that'll tell them exactly who's on the board and compensation issues and things like that. But they can also go on different financial pages to find out that information. So there's no reason not to be prepared. And when you look at the studies, particularly of the banking industry, and not to get too nerdy about this, but they say one of the key elements from building trust, one of the things that you have to have is empathy. Well, how are you going to have empathy when you haven't even showed someone that you care enough to find out about them before you're meeting them? So it really is a must. And then following up, asking for the business or letting people know that you want to work with them or sending them the follow-up information, those things are so vital.
It strikes me as maybe odd. I mean, in our space, in the IP space, like in the patent space, which I know the best, so much of what these companies do is just out there in the public, and it's not instantly out in the public. There's a 18-month period where you can't know what companies have actually filed, but you can know an awful lot about their portfolio. You can know who their competitors are. You can know what their competitors are doing. And sometimes you look at that, you get a feel for what the industry's going on, and you can see that for whatever reason, company A may or may not be doing something that company B is doing. And, that's interesting information, and it opens up a conversation. And I think one of the things in our space is, let's just face it, we're a bunch of nerds, engineers, scientists who went to law school to become patent people who have never been trained on how to run a business, because that's not what we've done. You don't learn that in law school. You don't learn that in engineering school. now are running the firms, trying to make it rain. And the joke about the extroverted engineer is the one who looks at your shoes, not their shoes. I mean, so there's a little bit that of a personal handicap in here as well. But with that being sort of the lay of the land, how do you encourage people to approach it to get better? Because it can seem quite daunting for an introvert to try and do this.
Well, are you talking about doing a pitch in particular or developing a practice?
Well, I think doing any of it, right? Because it seems
Mhm.
to me that like you have to. I think what I was hearing you say, and I definitely believe this. You have to take a step back first and look at what you're trying to accomplish, and look at what's out there. And sometimes I think it even gets so overwhelming for people who have a, let's say they're nerds, a personality deficit. Where do I even begin? Where do I start? Where's the first thread that I try and pull? Do I look at my strengths? Do I look at the companies I'd like to work for? Do I look at the industry? And it becomes overwhelming when you're not a people person about I think, and when it becomes overwhelming, you just tend not to do something.
Well, you said something very interesting that I think you probably said the answer. You mentioned, should I look at my strengths? And I think it's very important for people in professional services, whether they're a patent lawyer or whether they're a doctor, to be very clear on what their niche is. So within the world of patent, are they working on medical device patents? Are they working on complex engineered patents? Are they working on new patents? I think it's important to start looking at patterns of the type of work that you've done in the past, the type of work you want to do, also thinking about what kind of work is most exciting to you. And in my book, in fact, it's interesting because I thought this isn't a problem just for women. This is a problem for anyone, really. So in Breaking Ground, I talk about how you can figure out what your niche is. And I think, the niche is what you love doing, what you're capable of doing, what you're good at doing, and looking then at the economics of it. Is this an economically viable practice? And figuring out that element of it. And somewhere in between those two circles, like a Venn diagram, is your niche. So I think you need to strategize individually and to figure out what that niche is. Once you do that, it becomes a lot easier to market your services and figure out, what tactics can I use? Who are my potential clients? How can I reach those people? And that becomes so much more clear. So the one thing I hate seeing lawyers do is commit what I call random acts of marketing. Those people who just go to conferences, don't speak to anyone, expect to get something back out of it, but it might have even been the wrong conference for them. So I think you really do need to think about these things before you embark on them.
So I'm glad you brought that up because that was something I wanted to ask you about conferences because as people probably are aware, we do in-person events. So I see a lot of this, and I firmly believe that going to these conferences is very beneficial. And I see it. I see that's one way that I used to do when I was doing legal work. I would get people to know me, and you get business that way. And I know there are plenty of people who get business coming to our events because I see the relationships. But I also hear the people who are, well, I came to your event. I didn't walk away with a client, so therefore I'm never coming back. And I just think to myself, that's not how this works because I think when you raise the issue of empathy, that is a big one. And I also think people need to know who you are. They need to like you, they need to want to work with you because there's choices. And I just think that when people go into this transaction mindset, I'm here, therefore I should get work. And if I don't get work, then that wasn't the right thing for me to do. Misses the point of why it is that you're trying to go there and make relationships. Because I think it's all about relationships.
I agree. And what you're saying about it being cause and effect, it doesn't work that way in marketing. It's unfortunate. You can't say that I went to a conference and I expected to get a client out of it. That's not how professional services marketing works. And you have incredible conferences, and your conferences allow people to meet potential clients and to meet potential referral sources and to learn. So there are multiple things that can get accomplished by attending one of your programs. But I think there's a lot that can be done to maximize someone's attendance in a program. I think there's much more than just going. You can do a lot in advance, find out approximately who's going to be there. If you're fortunate, you can figure out, who is going to be speaking and maybe who's attending. And then I usually tell people, look at those lists and think about who you already know, who you should be socializing with, but also who you want to get to know. And if someone is coming to Virginia for an event or DC, they should be thinking about, well, who else should I be seeing while I'm there? Or if someone's going to be at the conference, do I want to have dinner with them the night before or breakfast the next day? Or what can I do surrounding this event? So I've seen people really maximize their involvement, which I think is the best way to approach these things, to really know that it's not just the event, it's the people and what you can do beforehand. And then, of course, what you can do after as far as following up with people, which is just a must.
So I love what you just said, and where you started was, who do I want to get to know? And it's about knowing them, and it's about listening to them, and it's about figuring out what they actually need. Because so I speak every semester. There's an adjunct professor who has been one of our speakers for a long time. He was been in-house for most of his career, and I go and I speak at his class. One of the times I spoke to his class, this issue came up about, finding work, getting work, marketing yourself, networking, and that sort of thing, which is on the minds of a lot of law students for the networking component of it. And I use the example, it's like, look, I've never asked this person ever for work because I don't do what that person does. I can't really help their company. I'm the wrong person. That's not where my technical expertise is. The stuff that they would need is not the type of stuff that I have ever really done. So I've just never asked for work. Now, that doesn't mean that that person won't eventually go to a company that would be straight away in my wheelhouse and I would need, but I think too often people they look at this like, dating in junior high. It's like, okay, if this girl doesn't say yes, then I'll ask the next girl. That next girl doesn't say yes, I'll ask the next girl to go to the dance with me. And the shotgun approach maybe works in some things, and maybe it worked when we were in junior high trying to find somebody to dance with us at the dance, but it doesn't work for marketing a professional, particularly in our area. I think you have to be wise about it and develop relationships, and then the relationships turn into work. What say you about all of that? Do you agree, disagree?
I do agree. I think you can build contacts in lots of different ways, and we tend to focus on those contacts of people that we already know, and there's a close circle of people that we know that can give us work. But what's also interesting about staying in touch with those people and continuing to foster those relationships is there's a secondary circle around those people who you've not yet met. And I think if you have a close circle and you're doing great work and you're networking with these people, they're going to refer you business or they're going to move jobs and need to hire you. And so you need to have a long-term approach. And in many ways, for lawyers, that's such a hard thing to come to grips with because they are used to cause and effect and they are used to thinking in terms of precedent, right? What has worked in the past? Will that work again in the future? But marketing and business development for lawyers is different. Not everyone's going to need you all of the time. I mean, maybe if they have a big patent portfolio and they're constantly feeding you work, that's great, but that's not always the case. And so I think you need to be close to those regular live contacts and realize that they also have an external network themselves. Um, Having said that, you're going to reach much more of a wider, diverse group if you have a wider, diverse group of close contacts, and that will help you see, business from places that you didn't expect it.
Let's go one level deeper and actually be explicit about what it is that we're trying to say here. So let me put you in a context. In our industry, there's a lot of people who just don't think that they can do it because they don't have the personality to be able to command a room. It's not like John Kennedy walking into a room and everybody wanting to, men, women, children, everybody was seeing, oh, wow, that guy's special. I need to be around that person. We don't have that kind of charisma often, usually in the IP area. So, what are some small practical steps that somebody who wants to make a change, that wants to go down this path, who is not the John Kennedy charismatic, everybody wants to be around that person, can do in order to develop themselves professionally and then ultimately down the road see that turn into business?
Two things come to mind. The first is that business development really isn't something that anyone's just born with. I think it's a skill that you build over time. And Jeff Klein, who is a lawyer in New York, once said to me, marketing is like muscle. And I've never forgotten that because I think it is. So, what I would suggest to lawyers who are not used to developing business or asking for business is to try it in baby steps. Try describing your practice to an associate at your firm or a family member, and then try doing it with a prospective client, and then do it with, someone who runs a conference. I mean, you just need to start practicing, and I think after you practice, you get better, but I completely understand that at first, it's like learning a foreign language. It's really difficult, and you feel silly, but taking those small steps, I think, helps. The other thing I tell people is the best rainmakers are the ones that are authentic. So, for instance, there's a Wonder Woman who I spoke with for the book who was telling me that she loves hiking. She loves hiking and taking long walks. And so she invites her clients whenever they're in town to come with her and join her for a hike or a walk. It's something that she enjoys and makes her feel comfortable and takes care of her health. And so she's inviting clients to do something that she likes. So when it comes to following up with the client or entertaining a prospect, think about doing something that you enjoy and realize that not everyone is going to love a cocktail party. And so you don't need to be going to cocktail parties. You might want to go and you can bring a friend or two and try talking to people because everyone really has imposter syndrome and anyone will talk to you. So I think that's important to remember. But I think baby steps are a good way to go. And I think doing things that are authentic. I also am a big believer, particularly in the IP space, for using LinkedIn. And I think it's a great way to show your experience, but it's also a tremendous way to connect with people by sending them a note, letting them know why it is that you want to speak with them, letting them know that you want to connect on LinkedIn. Those kinds of things can really help.
Yeah, I get all kinds of LinkedIn invites all the time. And the ones that stand out are the ones that take the 10 seconds or 20 seconds to actually add a note to tell me why it is that they would like to connect with me. Almost always when I get a note like that, I accept. And don't get a note, and I feel like I'm just going to be targeted. They don't want to tell me why they want to connect with me because they know they're just going to try and do a naked pitch to me for some reason, and it's just not how things get done. And I like what you said about the hike. One of the things many years ago when my son was still in high school, I had a friend who I did some business with occasionally. We were friends. We probably became friends because we were doing business. Now that I think about it, really, he was going to be in town. We're going to get together for dinner. He said, "Bring him along," and I brought him along. And the whole purpose of why I wanted to bring him along at that point was I wanted him to get a sense for what a business dinner was. And during the middle of the dinner, we got together. We had a cocktail, then we had appetizers, then we ordered, then we started eating, and dinner is just about over. And I turned to my son and I said, "Okay, I want to show you. We're now going to do business." And I turned to my friend, and he knew I was going to do that because I wanted him to see what this was all about. Right? We talked business for 90 seconds, and then the conclusion was, okay, great. I will send you an email tomorrow to follow up, and we'll do whatever it was that we just talked about for 90 seconds. It was just instructions, really. Like what's the next step? I will deliver this. I'll follow this up, and then we can have a call at the end of next week or something like that. And then I looked at my son and I said, okay, business is now over. And then we went back to talking about sports or entertainment or movies or whatever it was that we were talking about. And then I did that because so often I think people get this idea in their head: a business dinner is business the whole time. No,
Mhm.
business is about people. It's about, does this person really want to do business with me? Do they like me enough? Because in a lot of the business dealings, you're going to spend a lot of time with them. And if you don't like them, I always tell people, how good does the lawyer need to be for you to hire them if you don't like them? Now, I
Right.
suppose if you've been charged with murder, you don't need to like your defense attorney. You get the best defense attorney you can afford. But in that's a rare situation. Everybody else likes to do business with people they enjoy.
Absolutely, and sometimes you might even have a meal with a potential client or an existing client. You don't discuss business at all, and that's okay. I don't think you necessarily have to go in with an ask. Sometimes it's just good to be able to get to know people or to come with a few ideas of how you can help them. And that actually leads to another issue, which is you don't have to necessarily say, "I want your business." You can find the words, especially if you are an introvert, that feel right to you. So my approach when I'm thinking about if I'd like to work with a client or not, I very often will say, "What is there that I can do to support you?" So what my mindset is, I wanna help them achieve their goals. I don't want to line my pockets. I'm not thinking of it in that way. I'm thinking, what can I do to help them, whether it's they need to market, whether they need to get clients. And by having that mindset, it makes it much easier to say, I'd really like to help you. I'd like to be there for you. What can I do? Um, Sometimes it's someone just needs a favor. They need you to pick up the phone and introduce them to someone, and you don't get any business out of it. And that's okay because you've done them a favor. You've built some goodwill. Hopefully, one day you might get business or you might get a referral. But doing those things really is a currency. It's not any kind of waste of time. It's just an investment in your business.
I agree with that wholeheartedly. I think that it requires you to listen. It requires you to learn who they are, what they need, where their pressure points are. There's no people say all the time, "Oh, that person is such a good salesperson. They could sell ice to Eskimos." You always hear that old saying, right?
Mhm.
Well,
Yep.
don't try and sell ice to Eskimos. Eskimos don't need ice. You know what you need to figure out is what do you need help with that I can uniquely help you with. And if I can't help you with that because it's not my wheelhouse, then maybe I know somebody who might be able to. And I think that it's just about being somebody that people want to be around and talk to. And that was always my so I did go to a lot of conferences over times, and this may strike people as odd, but I am an introvert. And I would go to these events and I would put myself out there and I would come home and Renee couldn't even talk to me. I couldn't, like I'm exhausted. I would need a day or two to recharge my batteries to the point where I could function as a human being again. And then what I found is over time, it became easier and easier and easier and easier because you go to these events when you start going, nobody knows who you are because it's the first time you've been there. And then you meet a couple people. Then the next time you go back to the same event or the same group of people, then you know those two people. Now maybe I'll meet another two people. And then
Mhm.
over time, you walk into the room and it doesn't suck the life out of you or the energy out of you because there's people you know. And
Right.
and I always found like when I was doing that and then I was having fun and I was happy and that's when the magic happens. When you're not really trying to make it happen. It's you're just having fun, you're meeting people, you're talking to them, you're meeting their friends, you're going out to dinner and if you listen, if you that's the key is listening. And I think probably every relationship is to figure out what are their hopes and dreams and fears and pressure points and is there anything that I can help with?
I think that's such an important skill to have, whether it's going into a cocktail party, whether it's going into a formal pitch, whether it's, I give a lot of speaking engagements before law firms. I always do a lot of research in advance about the firm, but what I find most helpful is going there to wherever the site is. I go an hour or two before and I speak with people and I ask them, what are your concerns? What do you want to accomplish today? What are the toughest things that you deal with in your job, whether it's leadership or marketing? Those little conversations end up being so powerful, and there's such a great learning experience for me. So I almost take the onus off of myself and say, what can I learn about this person? And with cocktail parties, everyone has a story. Everyone has something that they wanna talk about. I have a coaching client who always says he asks about people's dogs, if they have a dog or a cat. And if they have either, they will probably start telling you stories about that wonderful animal. That's what he does. So, I think you find the icebreakers, you ask people questions about themselves, and you can take breaks every so often. So if you are an introvert, it's fine to be able to say, "Okay, I'm going to be in this room for a half hour, and then I'm gonna walk to another room, get a drink, or walk outside for a little while, catch my breath, and then come back." And no one notices, everyone is very self-involved, so that's another way to handle it.
So let me ask you about this because I think we've been talking about an awful lot of the types of things that I would say lead you up to the altar. How do you then go the next step, I guess, without it seeming salesy? And does it not seem salesy because you've laid the foundation and you've been working the relationship and you're trying to get to know people? Or can you still blow it by coming across as the used car salesman?
That's a great question. Well, I hate to give you consultant speak, but every situation is going to be different, and I think you have to judge if that person is going to be a potential buyer, if they are in the market and they're looking for someone to do their legal work. I don't think anything is ever wrong with saying to someone, "If I can do something to help you, I'd love to." And that's an easy thing to say to someone. And you can also put that in a note after you meet someone. "It was great meeting you at the event that we got to know each other at." Reference something that you talked about, "I hope your dog, Motley, is doing well and has recovered from his broken leg. And by the way, if there's ever anything I can do to help you with your work or just professionally, please let me know. I'm happy to help." Nothing is wrong with that. I'm a big believer in the soft sell because I think people know what you do and they know that you're gonna want their business, but I think you don't have to hit them over the head with it. So I'd much rather see someone after they've met another person at a cocktail party, send them an article about, a legal issue they discussed, or send them an article about how other dogs have gotten over broken legs. I think it's showing that personal attention and that you cared enough to follow up. That's really so important.
Yeah, agree. The follow-up is where I think a lot of this falls apart, and even the best laid plans, best intentions, just you need to follow up, and the follow-up doesn't always need to be and here's a 62 slide PowerPoint about what I can do for you.
Right, right. But maybe it's an article about a case that was handled that's similar to one that you talked about, right? It could be something small like that. I think I have a client/friend, although most clients become friends, who has a note to herself every Friday morning that she needs to follow up with people. And so it reminds her to go back in her calendar and think, who did I meet with this week who I can send a follow-up note to? Or if it was their birthday, send them a birthday gift. Or if it was an introduction they wanted, can I create that introduction? So she has that time set aside on Fridays and knows that she has to do that. And I think sometimes having those systems in place can be a big help in taking the burden off of your mind during the week. Just
Mhm.
keep track of stuff on a list that you need to follow up with.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of don't make it overwhelming. Make it easy for yourself because if it's easier, then you're going to do it. If it seems to become overwhelming, then you're not going to do it. The other thing I never really thought about this is applying to this conversation until just right now, but one of the things that I learned as a very young lawyer one of the partners at the firm, he passed this information down to everybody because it was when he was a young lawyer, he learned it from the person who had founded the firm, many, many years earlier. And it was whichever phone call you want to make least needs to be the phone call you make first, because it never is going to get any easier to make that phone call. And the longer you don't make it, the more likely you'll never make it. Then eventually it comes up and then it becomes awkward and it's ugly sometimes because you let something drop. And I think that that same thing kind of applies here for a lot of us, at least in the IP space, engineers and scientists. This is not easy. I understand firsthand what I'm suggesting, what we're having a conversation about here. It's not easy for us.
Mhm.
But if you don't ever do it, it's never gonna get any easier.
But today, there's so many ways of making it easy on ourselves, whether it's by using ChatGPT to help you draft a thank you note to someone if you're at a loss for words, or to ask it for advice on what kind of thank you note to send. And I'm not saying that we have to replace what we do with artificial intelligence, but I do believe for a first draft, it can be very helpful. The other thing I do, and I always keep note cards in my desk. I have personal ones and I have business note cards so that I can quickly write a note to someone. I try to make that easy for myself. I always have stamps.
Mhm.
I um, have a number of things that I send clients that I keep in bulk, in my office, so that I have those things here. Because I do think, and we could do a whole session on time management because I work with a lot of friends and lawyers on this. But I think those systems, those ways of making it easier for yourself, really, that is going to make a huge difference in the time you have to market.
Yeah, and I suppose if you give somebody a letter, actually send them a letter or a card with a stamp, that's gonna stand out way more than it ever used to.
It will. It will.
Mhm.
People are not used to seeing it, and it's like receiving a piece of artwork that someone did. No, it's incredible, it's handcrafted. So, when I get one of those things, I hold on to it. I
Yeah.
think it's someone took the time to think about me, but I think there are other things that I've seen people do. I know that I have a client who spoke with a prospective client about growing up in an area where there used to be an amusement park, and there isn't an amusement park anymore, but they found something on eBay and sent it to the client, reminiscent of the amusement park. I have had clients who have had their children do drawings and given it to their clients, after a company picnic. So I've seen all kinds of ways of staying in touch with people. And again, LinkedIn is a great macro way of doing it. If you're posting on a regular basis, your potential clients are hopefully seeing it, and your existing clients are seeing it. It's not as good as if you're sending them a note, but at least you're staying on top of mind, and I think it's so important to be on top of mind.
I agree. I also think I don't think, I know this for sure. One of the ways that I always used to get a lot of work was through writing articles. I would write articles. And I always found it, and I don't know whether this is a strategy that is there's a word for it or term for it or whatever, but it just always seemed to me that if people came to the conclusion themselves that I knew what it was that I was talking about, that it was much easier. Again, like I said, been going to conferences for a very, very long time. And I would see a lot of people it just felt to me like they would stand there and pound their chest and say, I know what it is that I'm talking about. And you see that in a lot, maybe not in our space so much, but in a lot of spaces you see that, like with CLEs. People, they speak on CLEs not to try and teach you anything, but to try and teach you how hard this is and why it is that you should hire them. And to
Mhm.
me, that was just always like, that's just not the right way to do it. The right way to do it is to explain to somebody what it is I know. And if it really is a complicated area, like in our area, the fact that nobody in a 30-minute or a 60-minute conversation or presentation is gonna be able to redo it on their own. But if I can break it down to them so that they can understand it in an article or in a presentation, that's, I think, half the battle, because the people then come to the conclusion that I do understand what I'm talking about. And then from there, that's not doesn't get you across the finish line, but it starts to build a reputation for you as being knowledgeable, which I think is very important, because then your net is much wider than just the people you meet at a conference or the people you meet at company picnic or, in your community, it becomes people who you don't know have found you and then want to know more about you. And then they want to, some of them work with you eventually.
Well, you're giving them demonstrative evidence, right? You're showing them this is how you do it. It's almost there's a story about Mrs. Fields. Do you remember Mrs. Fields? She had
Hmm.
chocolate chip cookies, and the way she ended up building her business was she would stand outside of her shop and give people a taste of her cookies. She would have them broken up into pieces. And I always think it's tough for lawyers. You can't give out free samples, right? It would be nice if you could. A much easier business, but you can at least show people what you know. And I think what you're talking about is doing that, demonstrating it by providing information rather than selling yourself. I think if you're able to help people and give them real examples of what to do when X happens or a new trend, that's a great way to position yourself, whether it's for speaking or writing an article or doing any kind of thing like that. And I should say, we talked a drop about AI. One of the great things that you can do is if people are giving speaking engagements, and I know lawyers take a lot of time thinking about what they're going to say, and they're very measured. But if you do go about giving a speaking engagement, by all means, record it so that you have a transcript, so that you can take that transcript and turn it into an article. And you can do that so easily. There's so many different technologies out there. I use something called REV, so I can record things, and then it gives me a transcript 2 seconds later. It's on my phone, so I have it. But you can do it using ChatGPT. You can use it any different way and have it turned into an article, or at least you can figure out what the main points are. So there's a lot that you can do once you give a speaking engagement.
It's funny you say that because that's something I used to do many, many years ago. I did it all the time, and it was before AI, any of these transcripts. So I would record it, and I had a transcription person I would send the recording to, and then they would send it back to me. And sometimes there'd be 2 or 3 articles in a presentation that you've given for, 45 minutes, 60 minutes, and they turn out to be very substantive. And then you also have the benefit of knowing what actually resonated when I was giving that speech or giving that presentation. So I think that that's a fantastic way of going about doing this. I think there's so many little things that can be done to make it seem not so overwhelming and daunting. And one of the things with writing, people say, well, I can't write. Well, I've given the suggestion that you just gave about, well, take a piece of your week and, where you're going to make these follow-ups. I've told people just like take an hour or two or whatever, put it on your calendar and that you're going to write something. Maybe at the end of that time, you don't wind up with an article, but if you do that a couple of weeks in a row, like an hour here, hour there, you'll wind up with something. It's one foot in front of the other, just like that Christmas song from that claymation. Was it Santa Claus is Coming to Town? You put one foot in front of the other, and soon you'll be walking out the door. And if you never get up, then you can't walk out the door. And that was something Todd Dickinson told me. If your butt is not in the seat, you can't. You're not participating. Your butt must
Right.
be in the seat and hit. This was with respect to going to conferences. And what Todd would always do, and I started doing this too, although I don't do it as much anymore because I don't think I probably need to, and I don't want to take opportunities from others up. But Todd would go and he would sit in these conferences. He'd sit in these lunch and learns in DC. They have these things at think tanks all the time. And then you get to a point, the Q&A point at the end, Todd was always the first person at the microphone. And he would always say, my name is Todd Dickinson. Like nobody in the room knew him. Everybody knew who Todd was. But my name is Todd Dickinson, and I'm with AIPLA or I'm with Novak Juice or wherever he was at the moment. And he'd ask this question. And then if nobody knew who he was, which was hard to believe, you would know who Todd was. But now they heard him and they knew. So I started doing that. And that was, initially it's like, well, who's this Gene Quinn guy, but I was going everywhere and I was doing that and people were seeing me. And then people would start to come up to me and talk to me about, that people would agree with me. And, there's a lot of things you can do. Maybe That's one thing that we haven't talked about yet that I did want to make sure we talked about is the new younger attorneys, associates. What is it that they should do? Do you have any strategies for them? And do you have any maybe words of advice for the firms? Because some firms like it when their young attorneys are trying to do stuff, and some firms don't like it.
Absolutely. I feel so strongly that young lawyers need to be developing their contacts, whether those are contacts from law school or from engineering backgrounds, whatever their background has been before they joined a firm, they should be staying in touch with these people through notes, through getting together, through LinkedIn, because these people are going to grow up to be clients one day, or they may start their own companies and need IP advice. So there are lots of different reasons to stay in touch with people. I think also when you don't train associates on how to master business development or even just client care, you end up with a group of associates that becomes partner one day and lacks not only these skills, but the contacts they could have made over the last 7 or 8 years. So I do believe in training associates on how to cultivate clients, how to think about marketing themselves inside of a firm sometimes and outside of a firm, because they're going to be creating these contacts that will eventually mean business. So it's really important to get them early on and get good habits and get them used to the idea about this, because going back to a statement I made earlier, it is like learning a foreign language. It is awkward sometimes. And getting people to understand that early on is great. I would also suggest to younger associates that they also start thinking about what their niche is. What types of clients do they really enjoy working with? What kinds of IP, what the areas are that they like, what appeals to them, and then really craft in later on in doing that kind of work. So I never think it's too early to start thinking about one's career and one's strength and one's niche.
I agree with that as well. And one of the things I've heard from in-house people is when somebody goes from like a law firm setting to then they go in-house, you probably can't imagine how many people who have been no longer in touch with that person for 10, 20, 30 years suddenly immediately get in touch with that person. And I've always tried to tell the students the same thing. It's like some of you are going to wind up judges, some of you are going to wind up in house, some of you are going to wind up as prominent attorneys in law firms. Some of you are going to wind up to be politicians. Your ability to parachute in at a moment when somebody who you didn't really like or you didn't really spend the time with now is important. That sticks out like a sore thumb in the bad way.
Absolutely. Yeah, and there's been research on taking the other end of things. If someone once liked you, so if they really liked you in law school and you contact them 5 years later, 6 years later, they will still have a positive opinion of you. But then the question is, how long does that last, or how long does that memory
Mhm.
last? And people do know if you've not reached out to them at all. They know exactly why you're reaching out. You're reaching out for business, and it doesn't feel great. It doesn't feel great for that person to feel used. They don't wanna be seen as a cash register, and they shouldn't be. So I think it behooves firms to really train their associates. The other thing that I've heard from firms is that we don't wanna spend the money, or what if these people leave? And as far as the money, it's money well spent. You can get additional clients this way, so of course it's money well spent. But if they leave, they'll have a better feeling about the firm that trained them than they would about a firm that didn't make an investment in them. So I would tell all firms that they need to invest in some kind of training on this whole topic for associates.
Yeah, absolutely. If you're not willing to do that, you're not willing to invest in your people. I don't get that. I hear that a lot from firms. They're so afraid people are gonna leave. Well, it almost seems guaranteed if you don't give them resources, you don't treat them right, and they don't feel appreciated, or they don't feel like you're trying to help them develop. Of course they're gonna leave. Of course they're gonna go somewhere else. I mean, it's a self-fulfilling prophecy.
It is. And on the other hand, I've worked with some amazing firms that will give associates budgets, that will give them, even if it's a few $100s a year, and say, you are responsible for spending your budget. Make sure that you're taking out either a colleague at the client who's on your level, let the partner know that you're going to be doing this, or someone from your law school class, or an alum of the firm who's left, but spend that money. And I think that's a very powerful message. It tells people, we want you doing this. We're actually investing in you. The worst is when you hear of a firm saying, we're telling our associates and our partners to develop business, but we're not giving them a budget. We're not telling them how much they should spend. They can ask us. Well, maybe a partner will ask them, but an associate's not necessarily going to feel comfortable asking for what feels like additional money. So I really do have great respect for the firms that are giving the associates budgets.
I agree with that. Well, this has been a fascinating conversation. I really appreciate you coming here. Your book, again, is Breaking Ground: How Successful Women Lawyers Build Thriving Practices. That's your latest book. I know we didn't speak directly about women lawyers. I'll have to have you come back to do that. And I really, really hope you'll join us in September at our Women's IP Forum, because I think that this would be a magnificent piece to add to that program. And your book before this was, what was the title of that?
It was Best Practices, Marketing and Business Development for Law Firms.
So if you're interested in this, you can get in touch with Deborah, but definitely get those books. I always tell people, look, if you're trying to make something happen and you aren't interested in even reading a book, buying a book, then you're not really serious. And these are two great books.
Thank you. And they're on Amazon, and actually Breaking Ground, which is about women, because I interviewed women. The advice really is for men and women. So it's really transferable, and it's also now available on audiobook. So you can listen to it when you do your morning walk.
Yeah, or drive in your car instead of listening to the radio, pop in something that'll expand your brain. I think this has been fascinating, and there's so much more to cover. So definitely we'll have you back if you're interested. But thank you so much for being here today, Deborah.
Oh, thank you, Jean. It was great to talk with you, and it's such a pleasure to see you.
Thank you for listening to IP Watchdog Unleashed. We will be back next week, and we hope you will join us again. In the meantime, please be sure to visit IPWatchdog.com to read all the latest news and information about what is happening in the intellectual property world. And also be sure to subscribe to our free daily email newsletter.